Bad news over the country of Kenya as they mourn one of their greatest. Yes, we are mourning one of the greatest, an irreplaceable mind and person, a powerhouse, a decision maker, a person who's come to serve the country several times when the country was in a place where no one could redeem it. A selfless person who doesn't think of himself, but he thinks of the whole country. We're talking about Raila Amolo Odinga, born on 7th of January 1945 and has rested on October 15th, 2025. He was a Kenyan politician who served as the Prime Minister of Kenya from 2008 to 2013. He was a Member of Parliament for the Lang'ata constituency from 1992 to 2013, and he has been a leader for opposition in Kenya since 2013. He was a leader of Azimio la Umoja One Kenya Coalition Party. Odinga has run for presidency 5 times, with none of his attempts being successful. Each time, Odinga has alleged an election fraud, which most of the people know that it was true and it was right. In 1997, he finished third as a candidate of the National Development Party (NDP). In 2007, he ran again for the presidency under the Orange Democratic Movement (ODM) and lost to Mwai Kibaki. In 2013, 2017, and 2022, Odinga was a runner-up as a candidate for the Coalition of Reforms and Democratic Party called National Super Alliance (NASA) and the Nation and Azimio la Umoja, respectively. After his loss, he filed a petition against President-elect William Samoei Ruto for the Supreme Court. At the Supreme Court of Kenya, the court decided against him, and Odinga pledged to respect its ruling in February 2024. He announced his candidacy for the African Union Commission chairperson, but was defeated by Mahamadou Ali Yusuf in February 2025 ballot. In October 2025, Raila died of a cardiac arrest in Kochi, India at the age of 80. There is a summary of the man, the legend, Raila Amolo Odinga. Let's dig deeper. The early life in education, the Kenya colony. Raila Amolo Odinga was born at the Anglican Church Missionary Society Hospital in Maseno, Kisumu District, Nyanza Province on 7th of January 1945 to Mary Juma Odinga and Jaramogi Oginga Odinga. His father served as the first Vice President of Kenya under President Jomo Kenyatta. He is a member of the Luo ethnic group. He went to Kisumu Union Primary, Maranda Primary in Bondo, and Maranda High School, where he studied until 1962, when he was transferred by his father to Germany for further education. His life in East Germany. He spent the next 2 years at the Herder Institute, which trained foreign students in the German language and was part of the philosophical faculty at the University of Leipzig in East Germany. He received scholarship that in 1965 sent him to the Technical College of Marburg, now at the Otto University of Marburg in GDR. In 1970, he graduated with a certificate in welding while studying in East Germany during the Cold War as a Kenyan. As a Kenyan, he was able to visit West Berlin through the checkpoint Charlie. When visiting West Berlin, he used to smuggle goods not available in East Berlin to bring them to his friends in East Germany. So since then, he was a man of people, a man who cared about his own people. Early life and education. Career, business, and entrepreneurship. Odinga returned to Kenya in 1970, and in 1971 he founded the Standard Processing Equipment Construction and Erection Limited, later renamed as East Africa's Factory, the only company manufacturing liquid petroleum gas cylinders in Kenya. In 1974, Odinga was appointed a group standard manager of the Kenya Bureau of Standards. After holding his position for 4 years, he was promoted to the deputy director in 1978, a post he held until his 1982 detention. Why was he detained? Let's get us to 1982. In 1982, Kenya coup attempt at 3 a.m. on Sunday, 1st August 1982, a group of soldiers from the Kenya Air Force led by Senior Private Hezekiah Ochuka attempted to overthrow the government of then-President Daniel Arap Moi. After the failed attempt to overthrow him, President Moi reorganized Kenya's security architecture, staffing it with his loyalists, and then be ensured a law was passed in parliament that gave him emergency powers while placing provincial administrations under the office of the president. Odinga was arrested and charged with treason after being accused of being among the masterminds of 1982 coup. He was released 6 years later in February 1989, but detained again in August of the same year to be released in June 1989. In detention, an era of unrelenting human rights abuse by the Kenyan government, Odinga was placed under house arrest for 7 months after evidence seemed to implicate him, along with his late father Oginga Odinga, for collaborating with the plotters of the failed coup attempt against President Daniel Arap Moi in 1982. Hundreds of Kenyan civilians and thousands of rebel soldiers died in the coup. Several foreigners also died. Odinga was later discharged with treason and detained without trial for 6 years. A biography released in 14 years later in July 2006, apparently with Oginga's approval, indicated that Odinga was far more involved in the attempted coup than he had previously admitted. After his publication, some of the members of the parliament in Kenya called for Odinga to be arrested and charged, but the statute of limitation had already passed, and the information contained in the biography did not amount to any open confession on his part. Among some of his most painful experiences was when his mother died in 1984, but the prison wardens took 2 months to inform him on her death. He was released on 6th February 1989, only to be rearrested in September 1988. He was released on 6th February 1988, only to be rearrested in September 1988 for his pro-democracy and human rights agitation at a time when the country continued to descend deep into the throes of the poor governance and the nepotism of single-party rule. Multi-party democracy. Kenya was then by law a one-party state. His encounters with authoritarian government generated an aura of intrigue about him, and it was probably due to this that his political followers christened him Agwambo, Luo for the mystery, or unpredictable, or Jacom, meaning chairman. Odinga was released on 12 June 1989, only to be incarcerated again on 5th July 1990, together with Kenneth Matiba and former Nairobi Mayor Charles Rubio, both multi-party system and human rights crusaders. Odinga was finally released on 21st June 1991, and in October he fled the country to Norway amid indications that the increasingly corrupt Kenyan government was attempting to assassinate him without success. Multi-party politics. At the time of Odinga's departure to Norway, the Forum of the Restoration of Democracy (FORD) movement was formed to agitate for the return of the multi-party democracy to Kenya was newly formed. In February 1992, Odinga returned to join FORD, and then led by his father Jaramogi Oginga Odinga. He was elected vice chairman of the General Purpose Committee of the party. In the months running up to the 1992 general elections, Ford split into Ford Kenya, led by Odinga's father, Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, and Ford Asili, led by Kenneth Matiba. Odinga became Ford Kenya's deputy director of elections. Odinga won the Langata constituency parliamentary seat previously held by Philip Leki of Kanu. Odinga became the second father of multi-party democracy in Kenya after Kenneth Matiba. When Jaramogi Oginga Odinga died in January 1994 and Michael Wamalwa Kijana succeeded him as Ford Kenya chairman, Odinga challenged him for the party leadership. The elections were marred by controversy after which Odinga resigned from Ford Kenya to join the National Development Party (NDP). In his first bid for the presidency in 1997 general election, Odinga was third after President Moi, the incumbent and Democratic Party candidate Mwai Kibaki. He, however, retained his position as Langata MP. In a surprise move, Odinga decided to support Moi, his arch-enemy, even entering into political merger between his party NDP and Moi's much-hated KANU party, which many Kenyans linked to the yoke of oppression. The merger was called New KANU. Previously admirers of Odinga now saw him as a sellout to a cause he had once championed by crossing ranks with a despot. He accepted a position in Moi's cabinet as an energy minister, serving from June 2001 to 2002 during Moi's final term. In the subsequent KANU elections held later that year, he was elected the party Secretary General, replacing Joseph Kamotho. It was apparent to many that Odinga hoped to ascend to the presidency through KANU and with Moi's support. In 2002, much of the chagrin of Odinga and many other hopefuls in the party, Moi endorsed Uhuru Kenyatta, son of Kenya's first president, Jomo Kenyatta, but a relative newcomer in politics, to be his successor. Moi publicly asked Odinga and others to support Uhuru as well. This was taken as an affront by many of the party loyalists who felt they were being asked to make a way of a newcomer who, unlike them, had done little to build the party. Odinga and other KANU members, including Kalonzo Musyoka, George Saitoti, Joseph Kamotho, opposed this step, arguing that the then 38 years old Uhuru was politically inexperienced and lacked the leadership qualities needed to govern. Moi stood his ground, maintaining that the country leadership needed to pass to the younger generation. Dissent ran through the party, with some members openly disagreeing with Moi despite his reputation as the autocrat. It was then that the Rainbow Movement was founded, compromising disgruntled KANU members who exited KANU. The exodus, led by Odinga, saw most big names fleeing the party. Moi was left with his hand-picked successor almost alone, with the party reduced to an empty shell with poor elections prospects. The Rainbow Movement went on to join the Liberal Democratic Party (LDP), which later teamed up with opposition Mwai Kibaki National Alliance Party of Kenya (NAC), a coalition of several other parties, to form the National Rainbow Coalition (NAC). Amid fears that the opposition Super Alliance would unite and rally behind a common candidate as in previous occasions and thus easily hand victory to the government, Odinga declared Kibaki tosha. Swahili for Kibaki is sufficient. An endorsement of a Kibaki ticket. This resolved the matter of candidacy, and NAC went on and defeat Moi's protege, Uhuru Kenyatta. The opposition won the landslide, 67% of the votes, dealing a humiliating blow to Moi. Odinga led the campaigns for Kibaki throughout the country, while Kibaki was bedridden and incapacitated following an accident while on his way back to Nairobi from a campaign meeting in Machakos Junction, 40 kilometers or 40 miles from Nairobi, in which he sustained serious injuries. On assuming office, President Kibaki did not appoint Odinga as Prime Minister in the new government, contrary to a pre-election memorandum of understanding. The Kenya Constitution had no provision for the Prime Minister yet. Neither he gave LDP Odinga's faction half of the cabinet positions as per the MOU. He instead sought to entrench and increase his own side into the cabinet, even appointing MPs from the opposition parties Kanu and Ford people to the cabinet. The perceived betrayal settled simmering disquiet, which in time led to an open rebellion and a split within the cabinet. A key point of this agreement was proposed a new constitution for the country, which was a major campaign issue that had united Kibaki's NAC and Odinga's LDP in the campaign. The constitution included provision to trim presidential powers to reign in what was seen as an autocrat presidency, a feature of both Moi and first President Jomo Kenyatta regimes, which had led to a lot of power abuse and uncomfortable leadership. Once in power, however, Kibaki's government instituted a constitutional committee which turned around and submitted a draft constitution that was perceived to consolidate presidential powers and weaken regional governments, contrary to the pre-election draft. Odinga opposed this and went to the campaign with LDP cabinet colleagues on the referendum no side opposition, the president and his lieutenants in a bracing countrywide campaign. When the document was put to a referendum on 21st November 2025, the government lost by 57% to 43% margin. Embarrassingly for Kibaki, out of 8 provinces, only one central province where his tribe, the Kikuyu, are dominant, voted yes for the document, isolating his own tribe from the rest of the Kenya and exposing his campaigns as ethnic based. A shell-shocked and disappointed President Kibaki sacked the entire cabinet on 23rd November 2025, when it was reconstituted 2 weeks later. Odinga and the entire LDP group were left out. Odinga led the formation of the new opposition outfit, the Orange Democratic Movement. And orange was the symbol for the no vote in the constitutional referendum. In January 2006, Odinga was reported to have told police that he believed his life was in danger, having received assassination threats. Having lost in 2017 elections to Uhuru Kenyatta and boycotted the rerun, Odinga had himself sworn in as the people's president. Miguna, who administered the oath, was deported. While Odinga faced no consequences, he went to have a handshake and take part in the government's decision. The handshake. In March 2018, Raila and Uhuru had a political handshake intended to cool the political temperatures after the 2017 general elections. The handshake resulted in William Ruto being sidelined in the government he formed with Uhuru Kenyatta, with Raila Odinga being elevated to the de facto deputy president of the Republic of Kenya. The handshake gave birth to Building Bridges Initiative, alias BBI. Building Bridges Initiative. Following the March 2018 truce between Odinga and President Kenyatta, the two commissioned a joint task force that would collect views from the Kenyans and report these findings. after touring the country and holding consultative sorry for that, consultative sessions. The team compiled and submitted the report to President Kenyatta at State House, Nairobi on 26 November 2019, which was followed by a public launch at the Bomas of Kenya the following day. The efforts by Kenyatta and Odinga to bring peace and cohesion in the country were applauded by several leaders locally and internationally, with the duo being invited to a national prayer breakfast international lunch in Washington, D.C., USA in February 2020. Supreme Court of Kenya would in 2022 uphold an earlier ruling made by the High Court stating that the BBI was unconstitutional. Odinga was appointed High Representative for the Infrastructure Development at the Africa Union Commission, that is in 2018. He was relieved of his duty by the entity on 23rd February 2023, the day after he incited his supporters to avoid violence through mass action. That was not an incitement. He just called the right thing for it. Announcement of the fifth bid for president on December 10th, 2021. Odinga announced that he will be eyeing a fifth term at the presidency, putting an end to months of suspense after his surprise truce with President Kenyatta. His announcement was made while launching the Azimio la Umoja convention, which will be his vehicle to State House, held at the Kasarani Stadium. What are some of the nicknames that Raila Amolo Odinga has held or has been given to him? Odinga has acquired several nicknames during his political career. This could include Tinga, Hammer, Baba, Jacob, and Agwambo. Let's talk about presidential elections. '07 presidential elections. On 12th July 2007, with Kibaki's re-elections bid drawing close, Raila alleged the government was withholding identity cards from voters in opposition strongholds, with the intention to skew the elections in favor of Kibaki. He also claimed that the intended creation of 30 new constituencies was a means by the government to fraudulently engineer victory in December 2007 parliamentary elections. In August 2007, Odinga's own Orange Democratic Movement, Kenya, suffered a setback when it split into two, with Odinga becoming head of the Orange Democratic Movement, ODM, while the other faction, the ODM Kenya, was headed by Kalonzo Musyoka, who parted ways with Raila Amolo Odinga. On 1st September 2007, the ODM elected Odinga as its presidential candidate in a national delegates conference held at the Moi International Sports Center in Nairobi. Odinga received 2,656 votes. The only other candidate who received a significant number of votes was Musalia Mudavadi with 391 votes and William Ruto with 368 votes. Earlier, Najib Balala had withdrawn his candidature and endorsed Raila Odinga. The defeated candidates expressed their support for Odinga afterwards, and Musalia Mudavadi was named as his running mate. Odinga then launched his presidential campaign in Uhuru Park and Nairobi on 6 October 2007. Odinga's bid for the presidency, however, failed when, after 27 December presidential election, the Electoral Commission declared Kibaki the winner on 30th December 2007, placing him ahead of Odinga by about 232,000 votes. Jeffrey Sachs, professor of economics and director of the Institute at Columbia University and the special advisor to former UN Secretary General, faulted the United States' approach to the post-election crisis and recommended an independent recount of the elections because the elections were marred by irregularities. Odinga and ODM leaders rallied against the decision, with James Orengo and Anyang' Nyong'o calling for mass actions. Violence broke out in the country. The government's response was heavy-handed, and it deployed police and paramilitary units to counter the protests. Following 2 months of unrest, which led to the death of about 1,000 people and displaced about 250,000, a deal between Raila Odinga and Kibaki, which provided for power sharing and creation of the a post of prime minister, was signed in February 2008. It was brokered by former U.S. General Kofi Annan. Odinga was sworn in as prime minister along with the power sharing cabinet on 17th April 2008. The post of prime minister was last held by Jomo Kenyatta between 1963 to 1964 following independence. Odinga was the second person in Kenya history to hold that position. 2013 general elections. The next presidential elections in Kenya, Odinga was to run for the 2013 March poll involving Kibaki's handover of power. Uncertainty loomed over Odinga's main rivals Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto, who both been indicted by the ICC of the Hague for their alleged role in 2007 general elections. Despite their pending case, the duo had been nominated by the Jubilee Party, with Uhuru as the presidential candidate and Ruto as a running mate. Many felt they were unfit to run for the office before clearing their names from such serious crimes, while others felt that their opponent were trying to unfairly exploit the situation by eliminating them from the race and pave the way for their easy victory. A Sinovet survey released in October 2012 found Odinga to enjoy a leading 45% approval rate against Uhuru and Ruto. Odinga's party, Orange Democratic Movement (ODM), joined Kalonzo Musyoka's Wiper Party and Moses Wetang'ula's Ford Kenya Party in a coalition for reforms and democracy for the presidential race, with Odinga as the presidential candidate and Kalonzo as his running mate to face Jubilee's coalition Uhuru Kenyatta, the National Alliance TNA William Ruto, United Republican Party URP Charity Ngilu, National Rainbow Coalition NAC, and Najib Balala's Republican Congress RC. A number of Western countries were not in favor of the Uhuru Ruto candidacy in view of their pending ICC cases and associations with the crime against humanity. Former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan voiced the reservations, and did former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Africa Affairs Johnny Carson, who cautioned against the elections of Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto. He was notably quoted as saying, "Choices have consequences," referring to the fate of U.S.-Kenya relations with Uhuru administration. Kenya's crying.